I'm reasonably certain that if I asked you to conjure up a certain type of image, you could do it. That image being the image of angry peasantry at the gates of a castle or a fortress with pitchforks and torches. And why could you do this? Probably because sometime during the course of your life you've seen a cartoon or a film, maybe read it in a book, a comic book. In any event, this scenario of rebellion, revolution, the angry underclass, that's something that we know about. There are historical events that reflect that, and of course there are fictitious depictions of this as well, most specifically the idea of torches and pitchforks. And this exists for a reason, because historically there's always been a relationship between those in power, the nobility, and the people that served them. And sometimes there were circumstances in life that brought about discontent, rebellion, even revolution. And so you would get discontent amongst the peasantry or the people working for them, laboring for them, and they would be very upset. And they would take out this frustration on the people that they viewed as being responsible, these people that were quote-unquote higher up. And this is something that has happened repeatedly throughout history in varying degrees. I'm not sure as to the historical attestation of pitchforks themselves, but it's an image that many of us have in mind. The angry peasant farmer with his pitchfork. And in response to this, the powers that be, as long as there has been civilization, well documented in several of them, went about pursuing a certain type of policy, that policy being the so-called bread and circus. Now, we use this phrase in English, but it's actually inherited from the Roman poet Juvenal, who wrote in the late 1st and early 2nd century. And he's the first one to coin this phrase, the bread and circus. And what does he mean by that? Well, he means the idea of distracting people from things that they would otherwise prioritize in life, important things. In his case, he named civic duty, a general awareness of the state of affairs in the body politic, etc., etc. And he observes that this bread and circus is a useful tool employed by politicians to both cow and sedate the normal population, in Latin the vulgus, the vulgar folk. Well, not much has changed since then, because bread and circus is still a perennial form of entertainment. But there are some key differences in the modern era compared to the times of Juvenal nearly 2,000 years ago. That being the question of finite resources versus near infinite resources. What do I mean by this? Well, at the time of Juvenal and the centuries that followed him, bread and circus was something that had to draw upon actual real resources. Animals for the sake of entertainment, gladiatorial games, theater requiring somewhat competent actors, and so it went on and on and on. And of course, because all of that required a lot more input from the real world and funds from the real world, it became very difficult throughout the later stages of the Roman Empire to maintain the bread and circus show, and people became unruly. The point I'm trying to make here is that when we compare the notion of bread and circus from back in the day to the current year, there are vast, vast differences. The primary difference, I would argue, is the infinite versus the finite. Now, infinite might not be the right word, but when we look at the means of sedating and cowing the masses in today's world versus the world back then, well, quite frankly, they are near infinite. We have an endless number of creators making content on YouTube. We have video games up to the wazoo. We have films. We have easily accessible food, and we'll get into that in a bit, and drink. So we have basically all these amenities that serve to constantly distract us and sedate us and take our minds away from whatever misery we might be experiencing. Furthermore, this serves to take our minds away from important matters of state, if you will, notions of the body politic, what's really going on. in the world because you don't need to know. You are plugged in near 24/7. And that is just fundamentally different from every scenario that has ever existed in the course of history. Never in the entirety of the history or prehistory of the species have we had this degree, these many options with respect to entertainment and the like. And so the bread and circus can, at least in theory, continue infinitely. Moreover, the matter regarding the bread and circus in older times was such that one of the major catalysts was that it wasn't just discontent, but actual deprivation of primary resources, which is to say food, water, and shelter. When those went into short supply, there were problems, because the bread and circus existed in former times as a counterbalance to that. Maybe there were all sorts of problems politically, but once you really start suffering in a very significant way, you're starving to death, you no longer have a roof over your head, then things become pretty dicey and quite serious rather rapidly. In 2021, we don't really have that problem. The vast majority of people, they're not going to be starving to death anytime soon in the West. And so that critical point where the dam breaks, metaphorically speaking, probably won't be reached. Now, one of the reasons I want to talk about this is because there's an obsession with collapse scenarios, and I understand why people are obsessed with it. I've been hearing about it now for decades. They talk about a financial collapse. They talk about a collapse of civilization. But if we try to actually map this on to former scenarios that have taken place throughout history, whatever similarities there might be, I would argue the differences are far more profound. So usually when people get tired of the bread and circus, it's because these very, very basic needs, say in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, are not met. Food, shelter, water, etc. We are suffering in the current year, in the current civilization, from a disruption of those needs. I would argue they are usually above that, meaning the needs to interact with people, social interaction, personal recognition, etc., etc. But historically, at least, that is not the thing that leads to open rebellion. That is not what leads to the pitchforks and the torches outside the castle, if you will. And so the technology that has been created, whether intentionally or not, it doesn't really matter, is really the tool that creates the perfect storm, in the sense that people might be discontent, but they largely have enough of what they truly need to survive, and therefore any impetus to properly rebel against the powers that be or to express their disgruntlement is severely diminished to the point of non-existence. And the truth is, we don't know what's going to happen exactly. One can prophesize all one wants about collapse scenarios and situations that might arise, but nobody knows exactly what's going to happen. All we know is what we can observe right now, and that is a very, very effective form of bread and circus that has never, ever existed prior. And it's getting more and more effective with each passing year. Now, this sounds really negative, obviously, because a sedate, depressed, unhappy population that is not inclined to do anything about it, well, that just doesn't sound very good. But I also see a silver lining here, despite my sincere belief that it is very unlikely that any massive collapse scenario is right around the bend, although we could always be surprised. I can see that possibility. But if it does happen, it won't be due to the traditional typical causes attributed to it. It'll be something completely new that we just don't expect, I think. But with regard to the silver lining, I would argue that the fact that we do have these opportunities to entertain ourselves, but more importantly, it seems very unlikely that we're going to starve to death, or that we're going to be forced to wander in the thousands throughout the icy tundra or something like that. Ultimately, I think that's good because it presents us with the opportunity to improve the things that we deem fit to improve, whether it's knowledge or body, whatever. In a way, the situation globally is the situation that quintessentially presents itself as the MGTOW path, which is to say everything is kind of screwed and not much is going to happen because of that, but at the very least you can focus on yourself, you can focus on your own interests, and because of the plethora of information, the opportunities that arise, at least in part through the bread and circus, but more specifically the technological apparatus that we've created, but you can avail yourself of that, and it will redound to your great benefit ultimately. So that's the silver lining in all of this. I don't think anytime soon there will be some massive collapse of the sort that we can historically observe, because conditions are just fundamentally different. But that's not the end of the world, no pun intended. And if it does happen, it'll be something that we just didn't see coming. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you've not yet done so, share the video, hit the bell icon to be informed of forthcoming videos, and if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you, and take care. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.